Today we are checking out the new revised model of the GPD XP that launched last year. It's the GPD XP Plus. We will be unboxing it, running some system benchmarks and then running a whole bunch of emulators ranging from Mega Drive to PlayStation 2 and more. And if that's not enough, we will be checking out some native Android apps and games to see how well they run. Grab a cup of tea, it's going to be a long one. As always, we start with the unboxing. Lifting up the first part of the packaging, we get straight onto the GPD XP Plus itself. We will show it in more detail shortly. Underneath the second part of the packaging is an envelope containing a screen protector and a user guide which is in English and Chinese. There is a USB Type-C charge cable, and it will also come with a power supply for your country. And we have two modular joystick connectors which can be attached to the right side of the GPD XP Plus. We will show these in a moment. Visually, the XP Plus is the same as the original. It measures 9.17 by 3.2 by 1.6 inches at its largest thickness including the grip. And it weighs 370 grams with the Xbox style controller. It has a 6.81 inch display which is 10-point touch supported. It has a maximum resolution of 2400 by 1080 when in landscape orientation. In the corner of the display you will notice a small circle. This is a front facing 5 megapixel single lens camera. It's fine for taking selfies. On the left we have a clickable left analog joystick and classic D-pad. Between the two is a screen mapping button which I will demonstrate later in the video. Below are 3 buttons which are used for back, home and tasks operations. On the right side we have the modular controller with 4 gaming buttons and clickable right analog stick. And on the bottom are select and start buttons. On the top of the GPD XP you can find left and right shoulder and trigger buttons. There is also a volume rocker and power button. On the bottom is a 3.5mm headphone port and a SIM and SD card slot. There's a USB Type-C charge port. This can also be used with a Type-C to HDMI converter to connect to your TV or monitor, which we will show a bit later. The modular controllers can be removed and swapped when needed. They are held to the GPD XP Plus with magnets and are quite strong. You can be sure that they will not disconnect whilst playing and actually require a bit of force to remove them. The controller you will use the majority of the time is the standard Xbox style controller. There is one with 5 buttons that can be used for shortcut style buttons in games. And there is an end cap if you do not wish to use either module. The GPD XP Plus features the Dimensity 8-core processor with a Mali-G77 GPU. It has 6 gigs of LPDDR4x RAM and there's 128 gigs of internal storage. You can add more via a micro SD card. For wireless communication there is Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth. It does support dual SIM cards for 2 or 4G data communication, but we have not tried this. The battery is a 7000 mAh battery. It will of course depend on what you're using the device for. We got a battery life of around 4.5 hours with benchmarks running on a loop, and well over 9 hours idle before we finish work for the day in the office. We have seen others getting over 13 hours whilst playing lower end emulators, which is amazing. Using an appropriate USB Type-C to HDMI adapter, you can output the XP Plus to your TV or monitor. There's no need to go into any settings, simply connect the adapter and it will display automatically. You could also connect a wireless gamepad and use that instead of the built-in controls, so you are not limited by cable length. We start the system benchmarks with Geekbench, which runs a series of tests across single and multi-core operations. We get scores of 952 for single core and 2765 for multi-core. In comparison to the original GPD XP, we got scores of 501 and 1601 respectively. And for the Ambernic RG552 we got just 266 and 714. So there is a very good increase in performance for both single and multi-core processing. Next we are running 3D Mark. Like its PC equivalent, it runs a benchmark on the CPU and GPU to see their performance working together. On the wildlife benchmark we get a score of 4147. Comparing the scores with other mobile devices shows well above average performance, and compares to the performance found in higher end range of mobile devices. And in our final system benchmark we are running Antutu. Antutu benchmarks the performance of the CPU, GPU and RAM across a series of tests. We get an overall score of 660,134. The score breakdown can be viewed on screen. Next, we are testing many different emulators' performance on the GPD XP Plus. 8 and 16-bit systems such as the Mega Drive will run absolutely fine with no issues at all, so we won't cover them in much detail. There are some individual emulators pre-installed, as well as RetroArch with emulator cores available for many systems. The VBA-M emulator on RetroArch runs with no issues or slowdown. We are checking out Contra Advanced here, and it scales up nicely to the display resolution, although not to the ultra wide resolution. You could stretch it if you wanted to, but it wouldn't look nice. Next is the turn of the Sega Saturn emulator Yabasanshiro. We tried a few different games and the performance is very good. We are getting 60 frames per second with no visible slowdown. We did see the frames drop very rarely to say 58 for a split second, but you would not notice unless you had the FPS showing. It's the turn of Mupen 64 Plus with Body Harvest running on it. We tried various first and third party games and did not have any issues at all with frame drops or performance in general. Everything should work great. Now time for some dual screen action with DeSmuME running Castlevania Portrait of Ruin. We did notice one or two minor drops in games now and again, but definitely nothing that would affect playing your game. As suggested by Gadgetoid on Twitter, he wanted to see Might and Magic when played vertically. You will need to redefine the controls to match the orientation, but it runs and looks just fine. I've got no idea how to play this game though. As expected, the Dreamcast flies along at full speed for every game we tried. There are some minor dips on loading screens, but nothing that will affect gameplay, which is generally a solid 60 FPS. If you enable the widescreen resolutions in the settings, it looks great on this display. Moving on to the PlayStation, we are using DuckStation and are playing the awful game Driver, which was suggested by Steve-O on Twitter. At least now we have shown it and we never have to play it again. PlayStation will work with no issues at all. There are different RetroArch cores that you can use, which have all kinds of filters and upscaling which you can use to improve the visuals. Next, we move on to the PlayStation Portable and PPSSPP. As a standard, we are trying God of War. We are getting a solid 60 frames per second, and you can increase the resolution and other improvements to make it look great on screen. And as requested by the boy Dips on Twitter, we have the classic Vice City which runs perfectly. If you can run God of War with no issues, then everything else on the PSP will be a piece of cake. Moving on to some of the higher powered consoles now. We start off with the PlayStation 2 and the EVA SX2 emulator. Do bear in mind that this emulator is very much work in progress, so performance can change between releases. Gran Turismo 3 initially starts off a bit laggy when there are a lot of cars on screen, but once things settle down it is mostly running at full speed. With some settings tweaks you might be able to get this running a bit smoother overall. Pro Evo 2010 on the other hand runs just fine and is extremely playable. We did try some other games and it's definitely a mix of what works and doesn't. Some of this is down to the emulator's compatibility and performance, and some of it is simply that XP Plus is not powerful enough. I was not getting great performance with Citra. We did update to the latest version and noticed in a few games there were graphics issues, so maybe the update is a bit rubbish. It is a work in progress emulator, but either way the XP Plus is not quite powerful enough to run everything at full speed. And next we have the Dolphin emulator with Burnout 2. We are getting overall 60 frames per second with barely noticeable dips that you miss without frame counter. We found many games that are very playable and the compatibility is good. But thanks to DankyKid on YouTube, who suggested we check out Ultimate Spider-Man, we can see that this game is very demanding. We are getting around 19 frames per second with some occasional freezes in gameplay. So there's good performance, but it's not quite perfect for this system. We finished the emulator test with some more Dolphin action and Sonic colours. The performance is pretty much spot on with some very minor drops in frames. This is a good game to test as you can set it up to play with a GC controller and not the Wiimote's emulation, which can be a pain to get running well. Unfortunately, not every game works as well as this. Many are very slow and some do not work at all, but the less demanding titles are playable, so don't fully discount it. Overall, the level of emulation is good on the GPD XP Plus. There are plenty of PlayStation 2 games to enjoy, and I think with Citra that may be an issue with that version of the emulator rather than the GPD XP's performance. Don't forget there are alternative emulators out there, some of which may work better than others for certain games. Next, we are trying some native Android apps and games to see how they perform. We tried the Xbox Cloud Gaming Beta for Android and it works great with high-end games such as Forza Horizon 5. You do need a subscription to Xbox Game Pass to use this. It essentially lets you stream games from Microsoft servers to your XP Plus. We had no problems with the streaming quality or drops in Wi-Fi speed, especially with the router being around 15 meters across the office. It all works great. Next, we are trying some native Android games and we'll start by showing the screen mapping feature. By pressing the screen mapping button, it will bring up icons for all of the controls. You simply drag the icons to the corresponding area on the screen where you would normally touch the input. Once that is done, you can use the controls to simulate screen presses and not have to mess around with poor on-screen controls. It overall works extremely well. You may find on some games that the sensitivity or accuracy is a bit high, but you do get used to it after a few minutes. And now onto some Android games. Call of Duty Mobile works great on the XP Plus, and as you saw, you can configure all of the controls for the in-game gameplay. You will still need to use the touchscreen for the menus, gunsmith and so on. I did not see any issues with the performance, there was no frame drops or lagging, and having controls does make the game very easy. Carmageddon is another game that you can map the gaming buttons to. It plays very well and the controls are responsive. Virtua Tennis has a built-in gamepad support, so you do not need to set up any screen mapping. Everything works great here with no slowdowns or issues whilst playing. Horizon Chase is another game that has built-in support for gamepads. The game blazes along at a great frame rate and I did not have any issues whatsoever. Genshin Impact does require screen mapping to play the game with the gamepad. There are plenty of buttons for the gameplay, but you will need to use the touchscreen for the menus and maps, for example. The start of the game is a bit quiet for action, but everything seems to be running very smoothly and it looks amazing on this display. Overall, the GPD XP Plus is a great improvement over the original model in terms of performance. We saw from the benchmarks that there is around a 50 to 60% difference in single and multi-core performance. This gives us a much faster overall experience both in emulators and Android games. Personally, I would have liked to have the modular control system drop for this model and just stick to traditional controls. It still feels like a gimmick to me, but do let us know in the comments if you have used other controller. The GPD XP series are for me the best Android based gaming handhelds available. The Plus model has a nice boost in performance and the TV output is great. If you were previously on the fence when the original was released, then it's definitely worth reconsidering now. You can learn more about the GPD XP Plus and order yours now from our stores at droix.co.uk and droix.net. We ship worldwide and have excellent customer service should you need it. And thanks to everyone who suggested games to try. We couldn't try them all as some did not work, but we appreciate sending in your suggestions. That wraps up our review of the XP Plus. We hope you found it useful. Don't forget to subscribe if you have not already. It keeps you up to date with our latest videos and helps to grow this channel. Thanks for watching and we hope to see you back in our next video.